I had always considered our small, sun-drenched corner of Maple Street a haven, a sanctuary of quiet suburban peace, where neighbors were more than just occupants of adjacent houses. They were in many ways an extension of family, a comforting, interconnected web of shared experiences, borrowed lawnmowers and casual over-the-fence chats. My life as Rachel Miller, a single mother by circumstance rather than choice, since my beloved husband Michael had tragically and far too young succumbed to a sudden aggressive illness some 5 years prior, was a carefully orchestrated, often exhausting, but deeply profoundly fulfilling symphony of love and dedication, centered entirely around my precious 10-year-old son, Noah. He was quite simply my world, the bright, inquisitive, and endearingly earnest son, around which my own universe lovingly, willingly, and with an almost sacred devotion revolved. I worked diligently, often juggling multiple part-time jobs as a librarian at our local community library, a job that, while not bestowing riches, afforded me the invaluable flexibility to be present for Noah to attend his school events, to help him with his sometimes challenging homework, to simply be there for him in all the small yet profoundly important ways a growing, sensitive boy needs his mother. Our home, a modest, slightly ramshackle but cozy and much-loved rented bungalow with a cheerfully unruly flower garden I tended with a passion, was always, I strived to ensure, filled with the comforting aroma of home-baked bread on a Saturday morning, the joyful, chaotic, and entirely beloved clutter of Noah's latest intricate Lego creations and shelves that overflowed not with expensive fleeting gadgets, but with well-loved dog-eared books that transported us both on countless quiet evenings to other worlds, other times, other possibilities. I instilled in Noah from his earliest childhood through gentle words, and I hoped through my own consistent example, the enduring, often unglamorous but fundamentally essential values of kindness, of empathy, of the profound dignity found in honest hard work, and the quiet, unshakable, almost old-fashioned strength of self-respect. I taught him as my own mother had taught me to value character over material possessions, integrity over fleeting affluence, compassion over casual unthinking, judgment. Amongst our generally pleasant, if sometimes predictably nosy neighbors on Maple Street, Sarah Jenkins, who lived just a few doors down in a slightly larger, impeccably maintained colonial with her husband Tom, an engineer at a local firm, and their son Liam, a boy roughly Noah's age, and until recently, Noah's closest, almost inseparable childhood companion, had always held a special, almost cherished place in my heart, and I had always believed in Noah's as well. Sarah, on the surface at least, and for many years, was the epitome of the perfect, supportive, almost idyllically kind neighbor, the kind of warm, engaging, and seemingly effortlessly competent woman who always had a ready, genuine smile, a sympathetic listening ear, a freshly baked casserole, or a comforting pot of chicken soup to offer in times of minor illness or familial stress. When my own dear husband Michael had passed away so suddenly, so tragically, Sarah had been a rock, a constant, unwavering source of quiet comfort, bringing over an endless stream of meals I barely touched, offering to watch a then much younger, bewildered Noah, so I could have a few precious, solitary moments to grieve, to simply breathe, simply being present in a way that few others in their own well-meaning but often awkward discomfort were able to manage. Our sons, Noah and Liam, had, as a result of our own close maternal bond, grown up together like brothers, their childhoods, a shared tapestry of backyard adventures, treehouse conspiracies, and endless, boisterous games of kickball in the street. Their joyous, carefree laughter often echoing harmoniously between our two usually open and frequently visited backyards. I had shared countless cups of strong hot coffee and even more intimate personal confidences with Sarah over our shared slightly sagging picket fence, discussing everything from the trivialities of upcoming school bake sales and the frustrations of PTA politics, to the deeper, more complex and often universal anxieties of motherhood, of marriage, of simply navigating the unpredictable currents of midlife. I trusted her, implicitly, unreservedly. I considered her not just a convenient neighbor, not just a pleasant acquaintance, but a genuine, cherished, and irreplaceable friend, a sister in the often challenging, frequently isolating, but ultimately so rewarding trenches of modern parenthood. But that carefully constructed, deeply valued, and seemingly unshakable world of neighborly trust, of familial peace, a world I had come to rely upon as a cornerstone of my own often precarious and emotionally demanding single-mother existence, was about to be shattered violently, irrevocably, by a single, devastating, and entirely unexpected phone call. A phone call that would unleash a maelstrom of disbelief, of betrayal, of a mother's fiercest, most protective, and ultimately most righteous rage. It was a crisp, deceptively ordinary, sun-dappled Tuesday afternoon in early October, the kind of glorious autumn day that makes you believe, however fleetingly, in the inherent goodness of the world. I was at the Northwood Community Library, my part-time sanctuary, meticulously shelving a new delivery of children's books, my mind pleasantly adrift in the quiet, ordered, and deeply comforting sanctuary of words and stories, when my cell phone, tucked away on silent mode in the bottom of my worn leather purse, buzzed with an insistent, almost urgent, and vaguely premonitory vibration. It was Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, the usually calm, unflappable, and universally respected principal of Northwood Elementary. The excellent public school Noah and indeed Liam Jenkins both attended. A cold, inexplicable, almost irrational frisson of unease, a tightening in my chest, immediately snaked its way down my spine. Principals, in my experience, rarely called parents during school hours, especially on their work numbers, unless it was serious. Very serious. Rachel Miller. It's Eleanor Henderson from Northwood Elementary. Her voice, usually so warm, so reassuring, so filled with a genuine, compassionate interest in her students, sounded strained, almost hesitant, a subtle but undeniable note of professional discomfort lacing her usually so confident tone. "I'm so very sorry to have to call you like this during your workday, Rachel. I know you're busy, but something rather serious, something quite upsetting, has come to my attention this afternoon regarding your son Noah." My heart, which had given that initial premonitory lurch, now seemed to plummet a sudden, sickening, free-falling drop into the very pit of my stomach. "Noah!" I stammered, my voice suddenly hoarse, my mind instantly, terrifyingly racing through a horrifying, almost cinematic litany of potential childhood accidents, of playground disasters. A fall from the highest rung of the jungle gym, a stray baseball connecting with his head during recess, a sudden, inexplicable, and life-threatening allergic reaction to a classmate's carelessly shared peanut butter sandwich. "Is he all right?" "Mrs. Henderson." "What's happened to him? Please just tell me, is he okay?" There was a brief, almost unbearable, and deeply ominous pause on the other end of the line, a silence that seemed to stretch to distend for an entire agonizing eternity, a silence that amplified my already escalating, almost hysterical panic 1,000-fold. "Physically? Rachel, Noah is quite all right," she said finally, her voice carefully, almost unnaturally neutral, a neutrality that was in its own way even more terrifying than outright alarm would have been. "He has no visible injuries. He is currently sitting here in my office safe and sound. But there has been a very serious and, I must say, rather disturbing accusation made against him, Rachel. An accusation of unprovoked physical aggression, of deliberately and quite forcefully harming another child, a younger child, here on school grounds during the main lunch recess period earlier today. Harming another child, Noah." My gentle, kind-hearted, almost pathologically non-confrontational, wouldn't hurt a fly, Noah. The very idea was preposterous, utterly, laughably, almost grotesquely out of character. It was an accusation so alien, so antithetical to everything I knew, everything I cherished about my son, that my mind simply refused for a long, disbelieving moment to even process it. "Ms. Henderson, why? I'm sorry, I truly don't understand." I managed to stammer out, my voice trembling now, despite my most desperate efforts to remain calm, to project an air of maternal rationality. "There must be some kind of terrible mistake, a misunderstanding. Noah, Noah is the gentlest, most compassionate boy I know. He simply couldn't deliberately harm another child. Who is making this accusation, Mrs. Henderson? And what exactly are they alleging that he did? Another even longer, more agonizing and infinitely more foreboding pause. Then Mrs. Henderson's voice, now laced with an unmistakable note of profound, almost personal discomfort, delivered the words, the names that would irrevocably, devastatingly shatter my carefully constructed, and until that very moment, entirely unsuspecting world. Rachel, the child who was allegedly harmed, is young Billy Peterson, a second grader from Mrs. Albright's class. He apparently sustained a rather nasty fall on the playground asphalt, resulting in a significantly bruised elbow and a rather traumatic bleeding cut to his forehead. And the primary adult witness, Rachel, the parent who brought this entire, very distressing and I must emphasize quite graphically detailed incident to our immediate and very serious attention, the one who is now formally and very vehemently accusing Noah of a deliberate, unprovoked, and quite violent physical assault upon her son, is Mrs. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, my neighbor, my friend, my trusted coffee-sharing secret-keeping confidant, Sarah Jenkins, accusing my Noah, her own son's best friend, of deliberately, violently harming another much younger child. The words didn't compute. They simply couldn't. They wouldn't. They were a cruel, nonsensical, almost hallucinatory jumble. My mind reeled a chaotic, sickening vortex of utter profound disbelief, of stunned, uncomprehending confusion, and of a dawning, horrifying, almost unbearable sense of betrayal. It felt as though the very ground beneath my feet, the solid, dependable foundation of my entire world, had suddenly violently and with a sickening lurching motion given way, plunging me headfirst and screaming into a cold, dark, and utterly, terrifyingly incomprehensible abyss of deceit and malice. Sarah, I whispered, my voice, a hoarse, incredulous, almost strangled croak. Her name, feeling like a shard of broken glass on my tongue. Sarah Jenkins said, Noah hurt little Billy Peterson. But why? That's simply impossible. It's unthinkable. There has to be a terrible, terrible misunderstanding, Mrs. Henderson. A dreadful, grotesque, and entirely explicable mistake. Sarah knows Noah. She loves Noah. He and Liam they're like brothers. She could never believe such a thing of him, let alone accuse him of it. I understand this is a profound shock for you, Rachel, Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice now tinged with a weary, almost resigned professional sympathy. A sympathy that offered me absolutely no comfort, no solace whatsoever. And please know, Rachel, that we are, as I said, taking this entire matter with the utmost seriousness. We will, of course, be conducting a full, fair, and thorough investigation into all aspects of this unfortunate incident. But Mrs. Jenkins's account, her eyewitness testimony was, well, it was rather detailed, Rachel. Quite graphic, in fact, and undeniably compelling. And young Billy Peterson, as you can imagine, is understandably quite distressed, quite traumatized by his experience. I needed to inform you of this immediately, as is our school policy. And I will unfortunately need to speak with Noah directly with you present, of course, Rachel, first thing tomorrow morning before school officially commences to get his formal side of this very troubling and very serious story. The rest of that interminable, agonizing workday passed in a blur of numb, almost out-of-body, disbelieving shock and a growing, sickening sense of dread. I remember mechanically, robotically going through the mundane, familiar motions of my library duties, checking books in and out, answering reference questions, reshelving returns, my hands moving with a strange, disconnected autonomy, my voice offering polite, coherent, and entirely appropriate assistance to patrons, while my mind, my heart, my very soul were a million miles away, trapped in a terrifying, endlessly replaying loop of Mrs. Henderson's devastating, life-altering words, of Sarah Jenkins's inexplicable, almost monstrous betrayal. How could she? Why in God's name? Why would she do this? Sarah, who knew Noah so well, who had watched him grow from a giggling, mischievous toddler into a kind, thoughtful, and remarkably gentle 10-year-old boy. Sarah, who had shared countless cups of strong, hot coffee, countless intimate maternal confidences, countless moments of shared, genuine laughter and mutual heartfelt anxieties with me, her supposed friend, her trusted confidant over our shared, slightly sagging white picket fence for so many, many years. It didn't make any sense. It was a grotesque, surreal, almost nightmarish distortion of everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I could trust, everything I held dear. The familiar, usually so comforting drive home from the library that evening through the quiet, tree-lined suburban streets of Northwood, a neighborhood I had always cherished for its sense of community, its perceived safety, its friendly, welcoming atmosphere felt like a disorienting, almost menacing journey through an alien, hostile landscape. Every cheerful, waving neighbor I passed, every group of children playing innocently carefree in their vibrant, autumn leaf-strewn front yards, seemed to be looking at me, I imagined, with a new, almost paranoid self-consciousness, with a new, unspoken knowing pity, or worse, with a silent, damning, and entirely undeserved accusation in their eyes. My carefully constructed, preciously guarded world of peaceful neighborly coexistence of mutual trust and unspoken support felt as though it had been irrevocably, poisonously, and perhaps permanently tainted by Sarah Jenkins's inexplicable malicious act. And then there was Noah, my precious, innocent, and entirely unsuspecting Noah. How in God's name was I going to tell him? How was I possibly going to explain to him in a way his young, trusting heart could even begin to comprehend that his beloved honorary Auntie Sarah, the woman who always without fail had a freshly baked chocolate chip cookie and a warm, enveloping smile for him, the mother of his dearest, closest, almost inseparable best friend, Liam had just with a cold, calculated, and utterly incomprehensible cruelty accused him of something so terrible, so violent, so utterly, demonstrably contrary to his gentle, kind-hearted, and deeply empathetic nature. The very thought of the inevitable confusion, the profound hurt, the terrifying fear I would see reflected in his innocent, trusting, and soon-to-be shattered blue eyes was almost more than I could bear. The idyllic, hard-won peace of our small, loving, and already somewhat fragile single-parent family had been deliberately, violently shattered not by some random, impersonal act of fate, not by some unavoidable tragic accident, but by the calculated, malicious, and utterly, damnably incomprehensible actions of a woman I had once so foolishly, so completely, so disastrously called my friend. The black, insidious shadow of her inexplicable betrayal had fallen not just upon me, but far more cruelly, far more devastatingly upon my innocent, unsuspecting, and entirely undeserving son. And I, his mother, felt a new, unfamiliar, and terrifyingly potent emotion begin to stir, to awaken within the deepest, most primal recesses of my being, an emotion that burned through the initial paralyzing shock, the disbelieving, numbing numbness, the profound aching, almost unbearable hurt, a cold, hard, diamond-edged, and utterly comprehensively unshakable, righteous fury, a mother's fury, and I knew with a certainty that was as absolute, as elemental as the fierce, unconditional love I bore for my precious child that I could not rest, I would not falter, I would not yield until I had uncovered the full, unvarnished, and undoubtedly ugly truth behind this monstrous, inexplicable charade, until I had definitively, irrefutably cleared my son's precious, sullied name, and until Sarah Jenkins, my treacherous, lying, and soon-to-be very sorry former neighbor, had faced the full, unmitigated, and very, very public consequences of her despicable, unforgivable, and life-altering actions. The game, whatever sick, twisted game she thought she was playing, was most definitely and with a vengeance on. The remainder of that Tuesday after Principal Henderson's devastating, world-tilting phone call passed in a thick, almost suffocating and deeply disorienting fog of disbelief, escalating anxiety, and a steadily mounting, righteous, almost volcanic anger. I remember mechanically, almost robotically, going through the familiar, comforting motions of preparing dinner for Noah and myself, chopping vegetables with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce that suddenly smelled cloying and unappetizing, setting the table with a precision that felt alien, almost absurd, given the chaotic, terrifying maelstrom of emotions raging within me. My mind, usually so clear, so analytical, so capable of rational thought, was a chaotic, unceasing, and inescapable battlefield, replaying with an almost sadistic, obsessive clarity every single word of Mrs. Henderson's carefully phrased, yet ultimately so damning pronouncements. Sarah Jenkins, my neighbor. My friend. The woman whose son Liam was Noah's closest, almost inseparable, practically a brother childhood companion. How could she? Why in God's name? Why would she do this? What possible, conceivable, even remotely understandable motive could she have for concocting such a monstrous, damaging, and entirely baseless lie against my innocent, gentle-hearted, and utterly unsuspecting Noah? When Noah finally bounded through our small front door later that afternoon, his worn backpack thumping unceremoniously as it always did to the floor, his bright, intelligent face alight with his usual end-of-school-day ebullience, eager as always to recount the thrilling, vitally important minutiae of his fourth-grade adventures, a particularly exciting and apparently controversial kickball game at recess that had involved a disputed home run, a fascinating, if somewhat messy science experiment involving baking soda vinegar and a model volcano that had apparently erupted spectacularly all over Mrs. Davison's new shoes, a silly knock-knock joke a classmate had told that had, for reasons only a 10-year-old could truly appreciate, reduced their entire table to helpless, hysterical giggles during lunch. My heart, already so bruised, so battered by the day's earlier revelations, constricted with a fresh, almost unbearable wave of anticipatory pain. How could I possibly in good conscience shatter his innocent, carefree, and entirely age-appropriate joy with the ugly, terrifying, and entirely adult-created news of Sarah Jenkins's inexplicable, almost monstrous accusation? How could I explain to him in a way his young, trusting, and fundamentally decent heart could even begin to comprehend that his beloved honorary Auntie Sarah, the woman who always without fail had a freshly baked, still warm from the oven chocolate chip cookie and an enveloping, comforting smile for him whenever he and Liam played at their house, the mother of his dearest, closest, almost inseparable best friend, had just with a cold, calculated, and utterly incomprehensible cruelty accused him of something so terrible, so violent, so utterly demonstrably contrary to his gentle, kind-hearted, and deeply empathetic nature. I waited with an almost superhuman, almost agonizing effort of will, until after our quiet and, for me, entirely tasteless and unpalatable dinner, until after Noah had with his usual meticulous, if sometimes endearingly reluctant diligence, completed his assigned homework, a worksheet on fractions, a short essay on the life cycle of a butterfly. Then, with a heart that felt like a heavy leaden weight in my chest, a heart that was already aching with a profound, almost unbearable premonition of the pain, the confusion, the fear I was about to inflict upon my own innocent, unsuspecting child, I sat him down on our comfortable, slightly worn, but much loved living room sofa. The very sofa where over the preceding decade we had shared countless bedtime stories, countless whispered childhood secrets, countless moments of quiet, intimate, and deeply cherished mother-son connection. Noah, sweetie, I began my voice despite my most desperate efforts to keep it steady. Trembling almost imperceptibly, my hand instinctively, protectively reaching out to stroke his soft, sandy brown hair. a familiar gesture of comfort that was perhaps in that moment more for myself, for my own frayed maternal nerves, than for him. Something rather upsetting, rather confusing, happened today, honey. And I need to talk to you about it very seriously. It's about something that supposedly, allegedly happened at school today during your main lunch recess period. His bright, intelligent blue eyes, so achingly, so hauntingly like his late beloved father's, widened with a flicker of immediate, entirely understandable childish concern. At recess, Mom. What happened? Did someone get hurt? Was it maybe Liam? Mom, is Liam okay? His immediate selfless and entirely characteristic concern for the well-being of his best friend, Sarah Jenkins's own son, sent another sharp, unexpected, and incredibly painful pang of her inexplicable betrayal, lancing through my already wounded, bleeding heart. Oh, Sarah, I thought with a fresh surge of bewildered, impotent fury. How could you do this to these innocent children, to this precious, unsuspecting friendship? I took a deep, steadying, and somewhat ragged breath, forcing myself with an almost physical effort to meet his innocent, questioning gaze, to deliver the devastating news with as much calm, as much reassurance as I could possibly muster. No, honey, Liam is fine as far as I know. This is about you, Noah, and about another much younger boy, a little boy named Billy Peterson from Mrs. Albright's second-grade class. Mrs. Henderson, the school principal, she called me at work this afternoon, Noah, and she told me that someone, an adult witness, has formally accused you, Noah, of deliberately and quite forcefully hurting little Billy during the lunch recess today. Of pushing him down very hard onto the rough asphalt of the playground, causing him to cut his forehead and badly bruise his elbow. The color drained almost instantly, almost theatrically from Noah's usually so rosy, animated young face. He stared at me, his mouth falling slightly, almost comically agape, his wide, innocent blue eyes now reflecting a mixture of utter, uncomprehending disbelief, a dawning, horrified fear, and a profound, almost palpable sense of bewildered, wounded injustice. Hurting Billy Peterson. He whispered, his voice a hoarse, incredulous, almost strangled croak, as if the very words themselves were alien, unthinkable. Pushing him down. On purpose, Mom, I would never ever do something like that. Billy's just a little kid. He's tiny. I was playing soccer, Mom, with Liam and Michael Davis and Josh and some of the other guys from our grade on the main grassy field way over on the other side of the school playground during the entire lunch recess. I wasn't even near the little kids' play structure, the one where Billy and the other second graders usually play. I swear, Mom, who on earth would say I did that? Mom, who would tell such a terrible, awful lie? His denial was so absolute, so immediate, so filled with genuine, unfeigned, almost palpable shock and bewildered righteous indignation that any lingering, infinitesimal, almost subconscious sliver of doubt I might have, however deeply, however unwillingly harbored about his potential, however improbable involvement vanished completely, unequivocally, blessedly in that instant. I knew my son. I knew his gentle, compassionate heart, his innate, almost old-fashioned kindness, his almost pathological, sometimes even frustratingly so, aversion to any form of physical aggression, any form of bullying, any act of deliberate cruelty. He was quite simply not capable of the kind of unprovoked, malicious, and physically aggressive act that Sarah Jenkins had so callously, so damningly, and so convincingly, it seemed, accused him of. It was Mrs. Jenkins, Noah, I said softly, my voice now thick with a sorrow, a disillusionment that was almost unbearable, the words themselves feeling like a betrayal, a violation on my own tongue. Sarah, Liam's mom, she apparently told Mrs. Henderson, the principal, that she saw you do it, Noah, that she was an eyewitness to the entire alleged incident. Noah's reaction to this new, even more devastating, infinitely more personal piece of information was, if possible, even more heartbreaking, more soul-destroying to witness. His initial almost defiant shock and indignant denial at the accusation itself now morphed almost instantly into a look of profound, almost adult bewildered and utterly uncomprehending betrayal. "Mrs. Jenkins," he repeated, his young voice now trembling uncontrollably, his lower lip beginning to quiver ominously, a prelude to the inevitable heartbreaking tears. "Auntie Sarah, Liam's mom." But why, Mom? Why would she say that about me? Why would she lie like that? I thought she liked me. Mom, she always gives me extra cookies when I go over to their house to play with Liam. She's Liam's mom. Liam's my best friend." His innocent, trusting 10-year-old mind simply could not comprehend, could not begin to process the sheer, inexplicable, almost surreal malice, the profound, deeply personal treachery inherent in Sarah Jenkins's devastating, life-altering accusation. He burst into tears, then great, body-racking, heartbroken sobs burying his small, anguished face in my lap, his slender shoulders shaking with the force of his unrestrained, uncomprehending, and utterly desolate grief. I held him tightly, protectively rocking him gently back and forth, whispering incoherent words of comfort, of reassurance, of my own fierce, unwavering absolute, and now doubly reinforced belief in his complete and utter innocence into his trembling, tear-dampened hair. But beneath the soothing maternal platitudes, beneath the tender, comforting embrace, my own internal resolve, my own quiet, steely determination to uncover the truth, to protect my precious, innocent child from this monstrous, inexplicable, and potentially life-ruining injustice hardened with each of his heartbreaking sobs into something akin to tempered, unyielding, and utterly unforgiving steel. Sarah Jenkins had not just accused my son of a minor, if unfortunate, playground transgression. She had, with her deliberate, malicious, and entirely fabricated lie, declared a vicious, unprovoked war on my family, on my child's reputation, on my own fragile peace of mind. And it was a war I now knew with every fiber of my being I was not just prepared to fight, but a war I was absolutely, unequivocally, and with a mother's righteous avenging fury determined to win. The next few days leading up to our scheduled and now deeply dreaded meeting with Principal Henderson were a descent into a surreal, disorienting, and profoundly isolating personal hell. A gray, oppressive limbo of uncertainty, anxiety, and a steadily mounting righteous anger. The news of Noah's alleged violent outburst on the playground and the subsequent and very official-sounding school investigation into the matter spread through our small, usually so gossipy, but now suddenly chillingly silent around me suburban neighborhood, and through the even more insular and often far more judgmental Northwood Elementary parent community with the speed and destructive indiscriminate force of a digital social media-fueled wildfire. It was fueled, I had absolutely no doubt, by Sarah Jenkins's own carefully orchestrated, undoubtedly highly embellished and artfully delivered, concerned, responsible parent narrative. She was, I imagined, with a fresh surge of bitter, impotent fury, likely painting herself as the reluctant, civic-minded hero, the brave whistleblower forced to speak out against a dangerous, aggressive child, and his negligent, perhaps even enabling single mother. Suddenly, I, Rachel Miller, the quiet, unassuming, and generally well-liked, if not exactly socially prominent local librarian, and my gentle, kind-hearted, and previously universally adored son, Noah, found ourselves the unwelcome and largely undefended targets of hushed speculative whispers, of cold, appraising, almost accusatory stares, of a subtle yet palpable and deeply wounding social ostracization that was as bewildering and undeserved as it was profoundly, almost unbearably painful. Mothers I had once shared friendly, casual, over-the-fence playground chats with women with whom I had commiserated about the trials and tribulations of fourth-grade math homework and the arcane complexities of the school lunch program, now offered me only curt, almost embarrassed, and clearly uncomfortable nods as they hurriedly, almost furtively steered their own suddenly precious children past us at the chaotic end-of-day school pickup, their eyes carefully, pointedly, and with a new, chilling distance avoiding mine. Invitations to neighborhood potluck dinners, to weekend children's birthday parties, to the informal, spontaneous after-school park playdates that had once been such a joyful, integral staple of Noah's active social life, ceased abruptly entirely, as if a silent, collective, and damning decree had been issued from on high, branding us the Millers as pariahs, as undesirables as a family to be avoided, to be shunned, to be whispered about in hushed, judgmental tones behind cupped hands and closed doors. Noah, my brave, sensitive, and increasingly bewildered Noah, bore the brunt of this sudden, inexplicable, and deeply unfair social chill with a quiet, heartbreaking, almost adult-like stoicism that tore at my already ravaged soul. He stopped talking with his usual ebullient, almost breathless enthusiasm about his day at school. He became quieter, more withdrawn, his usually so bright, so infectious, almost irrepressible boyish laughter, once a constant, joyful, and deeply cherished sound in our small, loving home, now a rare, almost forgotten, and achingly poignant echo. He would come home from school each afternoon, his small, usually so resilient shoulders visibly slumped, his bright, intelligent blue eyes downcast, shadowed with a new, unfamiliar, and deeply troubling weariness, and retreat almost immediately without his usual demand for an after-school snack or a recounting of his day's adventures into the solitary, and I feared increasingly lonely sanctuary of his small bedroom. He would often feign a sudden vague headache or an urgent pressing need to finish his homework that I knew from his increasingly concerned teacher's discreet, worried phone calls to me was in fact often not being done at all. These were all I recognized with a fresh wave of maternal anguish, transparent, painful attempts to shield me. His mother from the playground taunts the exclusionary whispers, the dawning agonizing and utterly incomprehensible realization that his world, his innocent, carefree, and previously so secure childhood world, had been inexplicably, cruelly, and seemingly irrevocably turned upside down by the malicious, inexplicable actions of a trusted family friend. He started having trouble sleeping again, a problem we had, I thought, long since conquered in his early childhood. His nights were now often punctuated by restless, anxious tossing and turning, by soft, muffled, almost silent sobs that I would pretend for his sake, for his fragile pride, not to hear my own heart aching in helpless, impotent sympathy from the lonely solitude of my own sleepless, tormented bed. His grades, once consistently enviably excellent, a source of quiet, shared pride for both of us, began to suffer, to plummet alarmingly. His teachers, initially perplexed, then increasingly concerned by his sudden, inexplicable lack of engagement in class, his uncharacteristic, almost defiant apathy towards his schoolwork, his new, almost sullen withdrawal from his formerly so enthusiastic participation in classroom discussions and group activities, started sending more frequent, more carefully worded, and deeply worrying notes. Home notes that I read with a growing, sickening sense of utter dread and a mounting, almost uncontrollable, impotent fury. The pain of witnessing my precious son's silent, bewildered, and entirely undeserved suffering was a constant gnawing, almost unbearable ache in my own soul, a pain far sharper, far more deeply wounding, far more fundamentally intolerable than any of the personal slights, any of the social ostracization, any of the judgmental whispers I myself might have endured, or might yet have to endure. But it was also paradoxically, and perhaps inevitably, the very thing that fueled my growing, almost ferocious and utterly unshakable determination to uncover the truth, to fight back against this monstrous, unfounded, and life-altering accusation, to restore not just Noah's sullied precious reputation, but more importantly, far more crucially, his shattered sense of safety, his fractured innocent belief in the fundamental fairness, the inherent goodness of the world. My initial, almost paralyzing shock and profound bewildered grief at Sarah Jenkins's inexplicable, almost surreal betrayal began over those few agonizing and sleepless nights, to slowly, painstakingly transmute, to crystallize into a cold, hard, and increasingly analytical, almost ruthlessly pragmatic resolve. Why? Why in God's name? Why would she do this? What possible, conceivable, even remotely understandable motive could she, Sarah Jenkins, my friend, my neighbor, Liam's mother, possibly have for concocting such a damaging, malicious, and demonstrably false lie against an innocent, gentle-hearted 10-year-old boy, against a family she had for so many years purported to cherish, to befriend, to support? Was it as I had initially desperately tried to convince myself a simple, tragic, and entirely colossal misunderstanding, a catastrophic case of mistaken identity, on a chaotic, crowded playground, an unfortunate, isolated error in judgment that had somehow inexplicably, almost malevolently snowballed into this devastating reputation, destroying accusation? Or was there as a darker, more insidious and increasingly insistent part of my mind now began to chillingly, terrifyingly suspect something far darker, far more insidious, far more personally, and perhaps even pathologically calculated at play? I replayed in my mind with an almost obsessive forensic intensity every single recent interaction I'd had with Sarah, every casual over-the-fence conversation, every shared school gate commiseration, every seemingly innocuous coffee morning chat, searching desperately, frantically for some clue, some overlooked incongruous anomaly, some subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her usually so open, so friendly, so seemingly transparent demeanor that might offer an explanation, however bizarre, however unpalatable, for her current incomprehensible and utterly devastating actions. Had there been some unspoken, festering tension, some hidden, unacknowledged resentment, some simmering secret animosity between us that I, in my own preoccupied, often overwhelmed single mother existence, had simply catastrophically failed to register, failed to address? Had I inadvertently, unintentionally, at some point said or done something, however trivial, however innocently meant, to deeply, grievously offend her, to provoke such a disproportionate, such a venomous, such a life-altering response? My mind raced, a chaotic, exhausting jumble of increasingly desperate conjecture, of painful, fruitless self-doubt, of an almost frantic, all-consuming need to find some rational, logical, even vaguely understandable explanation for the irrational, the illogical, the utterly damnably unbelievable. But no matter how many times I replayed the mental tapes of our recent and not-so-recent past, no matter how minutely, how obsessively I dissected our every shared interaction, our every exchanged confidence, I could find nothing, absolutely nothing to explain, let alone to justify her current monstrous and seemingly entirely unprovoked actions. Our relationship, while perhaps not one of profound, soul-deep, tell-all-your-secrets intimacy, had always been. I had steadfastly, consistently believed genuinely warm, mutually supportive, and built on a foundation of shared experiences and reciprocal respect. We had shared countless hours of laughter, commiserated over the often exasperating challenges of raising preteen boys, offered each other practical help with childcare emergencies, swapped gardening tips, neighborhood gossip, and the common, everyday, often unspoken joys and frustrations of modern motherhood. There had been, to my knowledge, no arguments, no overt disagreements, no lingering, festering, unspoken resentments, at least not from my end. Her betrayal, therefore, felt not just inexplicably cruel, but utterly, maddeningly, almost surreally motiveless. It was this very inexplicability, this profound, almost terrifying lack of any discernible, rational, or even vaguely understandable motive that finally, decisively, and with an almost liberating sense of clarity, convinced me that I absolutely would not simply sit back, wring my hands in helpless despair, and passively wait for the school's official and likely protracted and almost certainly Sarah Jenkins-influenced investigation to run its predetermined and, for Noah, undoubtedly devastating course. An investigation that would, I increasingly chillingly feared, be heavily, perhaps even solely reliant on the compelling detailed and eyewitness account of their primary and apparently entirely unquestioningly accepted adult witness, the very woman who had, for reasons still entirely opaque to me, fabricated this entire monstrous charade. No, if I wanted to truly, definitively clear Noah's precious sullied name, if I wanted to protect him from the potentially devastating long-term and entirely undeserved academic and social consequences of this malicious false accusation, if I wanted to uncover the real, unvarnished, and undoubtedly ugly truth behind Sarah Jenkins's monstrous, inexplicable lie, I would have to take matters decisively, courageously, and with an almost ferocious maternal determination into my own hands. I would have to become my own investigator, my own relentless advocate, my son's unwavering, indomitable, and ultimately victorious champion. The quiet, unassuming, conflict-averse, book-loving librarian was about to embark on a very different and far more perilous, far more urgent, and infinitely more personal kind of research project. A project whose stakes, my son's future, his happiness, his very sense of self, could not possibly in any conceivable universe be higher. The hunt for truth and for justice had begun. My clandestine, desperate, and often profoundly disheartening investigation into Sarah Jenkins's inexplicable life-altering accusation against my son Noah began not with a dramatic cinematic flourish of detective brilliance, but with a series of quiet, meticulous, and often deeply uncomfortable, almost painfully awkward incremental steps. I knew with a pragmatism forged in the crucible of long solitary years of navigating the often unforgiving world as a single working mother that I couldn't afford to be impulsive, to be overtly emotional, to let my own roiling cauldron of righteous anger, profound grief, and gnawing fear cloud my judgment or compromise the fragile strategic delicacy of my approach. I needed facts, not just feelings. I needed evidence, not just intuition. I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof of Noah's complete and utter innocence, and ideally some tangible, verifiable understanding, however elusive, however unpalatable, of Sarah Jenkins's bizarre, almost pathologically cruel, and seemingly entirely motiveless motivations. My first and most immediate priority was to try and reconstruct with as much painstaking detail and unwavering accuracy as humanly possible the precise minute-by-minute sequence of events of that fateful career-altering Tuesday lunch recess. The specific 45-minute period during which Noah had allegedly, according to Sarah's damning and apparently so convincing testimony, viciously assaulted young Billy Peterson on the Northwood Elementary School playground. Noah, though still deeply distressed, understandably confused, and clearly traumatized by the accusation and its immediate bewildering social fallout, remained my primary and most crucial source of first-hand information. Over several long, patient, incredibly gentle, and emotionally exhausting conversations held in the comforting, familiar, and reassuringly safe sanctuary of our own small, sunlit living room, I encouraged him with a mother's infinite tenderness and a detective's quiet persistence to recount over and over and over again every single, seemingly insignificant detail he could possibly dredge from his young, understandably agitated memory about that specific, now infamous recess period. Think hard, sweetie. I'd urge my voice a low, soothing murmur, my hand gently stroking his hair as he lay often disconsolately on the sofa beside me. Who exactly were you playing with, Noah? What specific game were you playing? Where on the expansive school playground were you located? Did you see anything unusual happen, anything at all, even if it didn't seem important at the time? Did you notice where Mrs. Jenkins was or little Billy Peterson at any point during that recess? His account, bless his innocent, honest, and increasingly bewildered little heart, remained remarkably unwaveringly, almost frustratingly, in its lack of any new revelatory details consistent. He insisted with a child's pure, unshakable conviction in his own unvarnished truth, spent the entire uninterrupted 45-minute recess period engaged in a boisterous, sprawling, and apparently highly competitive game of soccer on the main grassy athletic field located at the far westernmost end of the school grounds, a significant geographical distance from the segregated fenced-in little kids' play structure and sandbox area situated at the opposite easternmost end of the playground, the area where young Billy Peterson, a small, timid second grader, usually and almost exclusively played with his own age group. Noah was adamant, his clear blue eyes so achingly, so hauntingly reminiscent of his late beloved father's, wide and pellucid, with a child's fierce, unwavering conviction in the absolute veracity of his own lived experience, that he had not at any single point during that entire sun-drenched recess been anywhere even remotely near the designated brightly colored little kids' play structure. He didn't even really know Billy Peterson. He insisted with a frustrated sigh beyond a vague passing recognition of him as one of those really little kids, mom from like Mrs. Albright's class, I think. He certainly hadn't pushed him, hadn't touched him, hadn't even exchanged a single word with him on that, or indeed, on any other day. He reiterated with a growing, almost tearful indignation, been entirely, engrossingly, and happily preoccupied with his soccer game, a game in which he proudly, if somewhat forlornly recalled, he had even managed to score a rather spectacular, if ultimately disputed, goal, right before the shrill recess-ending bell had rung. His story delivered with such genuine, unfeigned, almost palpable conviction, with such a wealth of consistent, verifiable, at least by his soccer-playing peers' detail, only served to further solidify, to cement my own absolute, unshakable, and fiercely protective maternal belief in his complete and utter innocence. But I also knew with a grim, wearying pragmatism that a mother's intuition, however profound, however certain, and a child's tearful, heartfelt protestations of innocence, however genuine, however compelling to me, would likely count for very little, for next to nothing against the sworn, seemingly credible adult testimony of a supposedly reputable, respected, and ostensibly unbiased member of the community like Sarah Jenkins. This was especially true in the eyes of a school administration that was, I increasingly, and with a growing sense of cynical disillusionment, suspected likely far more concerned with quickly, quietly, and with minimal institutional disruption, or potential legal liability resolving a potentially contentious and publicly embarrassing student aggression incident, than with engaging in a protracted, complex, and potentially reputation-damaging quest for nuanced, inconvenient, or administratively challenging truth. I needed more. I needed independent corroboration. I needed irrefutable objective evidence. My next and far more delicate, almost tiptoeing step in this increasingly desperate, shadow-strewn investigation was to try and discreetly, without raising undue alarm, without triggering further gossip, without inadvertently compromising my own already precarious social standing within the hypersensitive Northwood parent community, speak to some of the other children Noah had so consistently, so confidently named as being active present participants in his soccer game, that fateful Tuesday recess. And even more importantly, and far more strategically, I needed to speak to their parents, the adults whose testimony, whose corroboration of Noah's alibi might actually carry some weight, some influence with Principal Henderson and the school's investigative team. This required a level of social maneuvering of subtle, almost Machiavellian diplomacy that I, a naturally introverted, conflict-averse, and generally straightforward librarian, did not readily or comfortably possess. But the thought of Noah's sullied, precious reputation, of his innocent, bright spirit being slowly, inexorably crushed under the unyielding, unjust weight of this monstrous, unfounded accusation spurred me on with a fierce, almost preternatural maternal courage, a courage I hadn't even known I was capable of. I started with the parents I knew best, the ones with whom I had over the years managed to cultivate at least a nodding, casually friendly, if not deeply intimate acquaintance from previous school events, shared volunteer duties, or fleeting neighborhood interactions. I approached them cautiously, usually via private phone calls in the evenings after the children were in bed, framing my inquiries not as an aggressive, accusatory challenge to Sarah Jenkins's veracity, or even as a direct confrontational questioning of the school's ongoing and, I suspected, deeply flawed investigation. Instead, I presented myself as a concerned, bewildered, and deeply distressed mother, simply earnestly trying to understand to clarify a very confusing and, for Noah, deeply upsetting alleged playground incident involving my son. I emphasized Noah's consistent, unwavering denial of any involvement, his profound distress at the accusation, and my own desperate maternal need to simply understand what had truly actually transpired. The responses I received during those initial tentative and often deeply uncomfortable exploratory conversations were mixed, to say the least, a revealing if disheartening cross-section of human nature in a small, tightly knit and suddenly gossip-fueled suburban community. Some parents clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation, perhaps already swayed by Sarah Jenkins's undoubtedly persuasive and likely highly emotional initial narrative, or simply and perhaps understandably unwilling to become entangled in what was rapidly devolving into a messy, unpleasant, and potentially divisive neighborhood dispute, were polite but distant, offering vague, non-committal, and ultimately unhelpful responses. Their eyes, even over the phone lines, seemed to dart away from the uncomfortable truth of my inquiries, their voices laced with an almost palpable desire to end the conversation as quickly and as non-committally as possible. Others, however, particularly those whose own children were good, established friends with Noah. Those who knew firsthand his gentle, non-aggressive, and fundamentally kind-hearted nature, expressed genuine, unfeigned surprise, even outright indignant disbelief at the very notion of Noah being capable of such an unprovoked, violent act. A few of these more sympathetic and courageous parents blessed their fair-minded, principled hearts, even offered without any prompting from me to speak directly to their own children to try and glean any further potentially corroborating details about that specific, now infamous Tuesday lunch recess period. It was through one of these more supportive and ultimately invaluable parents, a kind, sensible, and refreshingly no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Carol Davis, whose own son, young Michael Davis, was one of Noah's regular and most enthusiastic soccer-playing companions, that I received my first crucial and potentially game-changing piece of independent corroborating information. Mrs. Davis, after having a long, detailed conversation with her son Michael about the events of that Tuesday recess, called me back later that same evening. Her voice, usually so calm and measured, now tinged with a new, unmistakable note of concerned, almost urgent urgency. "Anna," she said, her voice low and serious, "I've just had a very long, very detailed chat with Michael, and he is absolutely, unequivocally adamant, as are apparently two of his other close friends, Josh and Kevin, who were also playing in that very same soccer game, that Noah, your Noah, was with them right there on the main athletic field for the entire uninterrupted lunch recess period that Tuesday. They all remember it quite clearly, apparently, because Noah Michael says scored a rather spectacular and apparently somewhat controversial game-winning goal right before the final. Bell rang a goal they were all still arguing and laughing about as they headed back into class." Her voice softened with a note of maternal empathy. "They all said, Anna, without any hesitation, without any prompting from me, that there's absolutely no way, no possible way, Noah could have been over by the little kids' play structure on the other side of the playground, let alone have been involved in any kind of physical altercation with young Billy Peterson, without all of them, and especially Liam Jenkins, who was apparently Noah's defensive partner that day, noticing. They're actually all quite upset about it now, Anna, that they know what Noah's being accused of. They feel he's being completely and very unfairly blamed for something he clearly demonstrably didn't do." Her words, her son's clear, unwavering, and now independently corroborated testimony, were like a sudden, brilliant ray of sunshine piercing through the oppressive, suffocating, almost impenetrable fog of my despair. Witnesses. Multiple credible and entirely unbiased child witnesses who could directly, unequivocally, and with a wealth of specific corroborating details support Noah's alibi, his claim of complete innocence. This was huge. This was potentially game-changing. But then Mrs. Davis, her voice dropping almost to a conspiratorial whisper, added another even more intriguing and deeply profoundly unsettling piece to this rapidly darkening and increasingly complex puzzle. "And Anna," she continued, a new note of almost hesitant, bewildered concern entering her tone, "Michael also mentioned something else. Something rather odd. Something that didn't really register with him as significant at the time, but now in light of everything, it seems rather strange, potentially very relevant." I held my breath, my heart pounding a new, almost hopeful rhythm. "What is it, Carol? What did Michael see?" "Well," she said, choosing her words with care. "Michael said that just a few minutes before the end of recess bell rang that day, while he and Noah and the others were still very much engrossed in their soccer game on the main field, he happened to glance over towards the administrative wing of the school, the part that overlooks the primary playground, the area where the little kids' play structure and the second-grade classrooms are located. And he saw Mrs. Jenkins, Sarah, your neighbor, standing there near the entrance to the second-grade hallway. He said she seemed really agitated, Anna, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, and she was talking quite heatedly, almost angrily, it looked like, to another woman, a younger woman with long dark hair, a woman he didn't recognize who was, he said, holding a crying child, a small little boy who Michael now thinks in retrospect, given his size and distress, might very well have been young Billy Peterson. He said Mrs. Jenkins looked really, really angry, Anna. Her face was all red and blotchy, and then, just as the bell for the end of recess finally rang, he saw her, Sarah Jenkins, hurrying off, almost running in the direction of Principal Henderson's office with that other unidentified woman and the still sobbing little child trailing in her wake. He didn't think much of it at the time, of course, Anna. You know how kids are, they see adults arguing, they just figure it's adult stuff. But now knowing what Noah's been accused of and when he was accused of it, well, it seems rather significant, doesn't it? Almost like she was already there, already dealing with an incident involving Billy before recess had even officially ended, before Noah could have possibly even left the soccer field on the other side of the school grounds. Significant. It was more than significant. It was potentially explosive. If Sarah Jenkins was already at the scene of the alleged incident, already agitated already in the company of the supposedly injured child and another as yet entirely unidentified adult witness before the end of recess, before Noah and his entire group of soccer-playing friends had even left the distant athletic field, then her entire carefully constructed narrative, her supposedly eyewitness claim to have seen Noah, my Noah violently push little Billy Peterson down, began to unravel, to completely comprehensively and catastrophically disintegrate with a stunning, almost breathtaking, and deeply profoundly satisfying speed. My mind raced 1,000 new questions, 1,000 new electrifying possibilities, 1,000 new and even darker, more disturbing suspicions now swirling, coalescing within me. Who was this other mysterious, unidentified woman with the long, dark hair? Was she another parent, a teacher's aide, a school volunteer? And why, if she was indeed a witness, or even a participant in whatever had actually transpired with young Billy Peterson, had Sarah Jenkins never once mentioned her presence, her involvement in her initial and apparently so compelling and detailed accusation to Principal Henderson? Was it possible, I now wondered with a sudden chilling, almost dizzying clarity, that Sarah Jenkins herself hadn't actually witnessed anything involving Noah at all? Was it possible, I dared to hope, that her entire devastating story was a complete, utter, and malicious fabrication? A cruel, calculated concoction based on, what? Second-hand information. A gross agenda-driven misunderstanding, or something far more deliberate, far more personal, far more sinister. The overwhelming, all-consuming need to uncover the truth, to unmask Sarah Jenkins's real and undoubtedly very ugly motives, to definitively, irrefutably, and very, very publicly Clear, my innocent son's precious sullied name now burned within me with an intensity that was almost a physical, palpable ache. My next crucial and I now knew absolutely pivotal step in this increasingly complex and deeply personal investigation was to try and identify this mysterious other woman, the one with the long dark hair, the one who had been with Sarah and the crying, supposedly injured child. And then I needed to find a way, a legally sound, ethically defensible, and ultimately successful way to access the one piece of potentially objective, entirely unbiased, and utterly game-changing evidence that could either irrefutably corroborate or completely comprehensively demolish Sarah Jenkins's damning and increasingly deliciously suspect accusation, the Northwood Elementary School playground security camera footage for that entire fateful and now so critically important Tuesday lunch recess period. The labyrinth of lies I sensed with a new, almost exhilarating surge of adrenaline was becoming more complex, more convoluted, with every new unsettling and potentially revelatory discovery. But I, Anna Miller, a mother on a mission, was more determined, more focused, and more empowered than ever before to navigate its treacherous, shadowy twists and turns, to relentlessly, unyieldingly follow the fragile, often almost invisible, but ultimately, I believed, unbreakable, unraveling thread of truth, wherever and to whomever it might ultimately and devastatingly lead me. My son's future, his happiness, his very sense of justice, and his place in the world depended on it. And I would not, I could not, I would not fail him. The information gleaned from Mrs. Davis and her son Michael, the corroborated alibi for Noah, the deeply unsettling account of Sarah Jenkins's agitated presence near the second-grade classrooms with a crying Billy Peterson and an unidentified woman before recess had even concluded, was not just a ray of hope. It was a seismic shift in my understanding of the entire nightmarish situation. It transformed my desperate, often fumbling quest for truth from a defensive battle to clear Noah's name into something far more proactive, far more offensive. Sarah Jenkins hadn't just made a mistake. She had it now seemed increasingly, terrifyingly plausible, deliberately, maliciously lied. But why? The question of her motive, her bizarre, almost pathological need to implicate my innocent son still loomed large and ominous unanswered enigma at the very heart of this rapidly darkening, increasingly complex puzzle. My immediate overriding priority now became twofold. First, to definitively identify the mysterious other woman Michael Davis had seen with Sarah and Billy Peterson, and second, to gain access by any legal and ethical means necessary to that potentially crucial, game-changing Northwood Elementary School playground security camera footage. Identifying the other woman proved to be less challenging than I had initially feared. Armed with Michael Davis's surprisingly detailed description, younger, maybe late 20s or early 30s, long, very dark, almost black hair, kind of stylishly dressed, but looking really stressed out, almost as upset as the little boy. I began a quiet, systematic, and incredibly discreet process of inquiry. I started by subtly questioning some of the more observant and generally more gossip-inclined, in a harmless community news kind of way, mothers of second graders I knew from my library work or previous less fraught school volunteer activities. I framed my questions vaguely innocuously mentioning a new parent I thought I'd seen who seemed a bit overwhelmed and whom I was hoping to reach out to offer some support. After a few fruitless dead-end conversations, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Henderson, the school principal herself. During our scheduled and, for me, deeply dreaded pre-investigation meeting the following morning, a meeting I now approached not with trepidation, but with a new steely, albeit carefully concealed resolve, I made a point after Noah had once again, calmly, clearly, and with an unwavering conviction reiterated his absolute innocence, and his detailed alibi to very casually, almost as an afterthought, inquire if there had been any other adults, perhaps a new teacher's aide or a parent volunteer present on the primary playground, or near the second-grade wing around the time of the alleged incident involving Billy Peterson. Principal Henderson, a woman whose professional integrity I had, despite my current adversarial circumstances, always fundamentally respected, frowned thoughtfully for a moment, then consulted her own meticulously kept daily logbook. "Actually, Rachel," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Yes, there was. Young Billy Peterson's mother, a Ms. Amanda Peterson, no relation I believe to our own Mrs. Peterson on staff, was indeed on school grounds that Tuesday. She had a pre-scheduled brief meeting with Mrs. Albright, Billy's second-grade teacher, right after lunch recess to discuss some minor academic concerns. She arrived a little early, I believe, and was waiting in the corridor outside Mrs. Albright's classroom for a few minutes before their appointed time. She does indeed have long, dark hair and is, as I recall, rather fashionably attired. Amanda Peterson, Billy's own mother. She was the unidentified woman, and Sarah Jenkins had, for reasons still opaque but undoubtedly sinister, failed to mention her presence, her direct involvement as the mother of the allegedly injured child in her initial and apparently so compelling report to the principal. This omission was not just curious, it was, I felt with a chilling certainty, deeply, profoundly significant. My next and far more formidable challenge was the playground security camera footage. I knew from bitter experience and from Laura Hayes, my trusted lawyer from a previous unrelated but equally challenging legal battle. Life, it seemed, had a penchant for recycling its more formidable allies. Sage counsel in other matters that schools, like any institution, were often fiercely protective of their security data, citing privacy concerns, student confidentiality, and a general, almost reflexive aversion to any external scrutiny that might reveal internal flaws or potential liabilities. A direct personal request from me, a parent whose child was currently under formal investigation for an act of alleged violence, would, I knew, be met with an immediate and likely insurmountable stone wall of bureaucratic refusal. This is where Laura Hayes, with her sharp legal mind, her intricate understanding of educational law, and her unflappable professional demeanor once again became my indispensable strategic champion. After I had breathlessly, urgently relayed to her the new critical information from Mrs. Davis and my subsequent almost accidental identification of Amanda Peterson via Principal Henderson, Laura immediately drafted another formal, legally potent letter. This time it was addressed directly to the Northwood Unified School District's superintendent and their chief legal counsel. The letter, a masterpiece of polite but unyielding legal persuasion, respectfully yet unequivocally requested, indeed demanded, immediate, unedited, and supervised access for myself and my legal representative to the entirety of the Northwood Elementary School playground security camera footage for the full duration of the lunch recess period on that fateful Tuesday. It cited Noah's fundamental right to a fair and impartial investigation, the clear exculpatory potential of the footage given the new corroborated witness testimonies placing him far from the scene of the alleged incident, and the school's own legal and ethical obligation to preserve and provide any and all evidence relevant to an ongoing student disciplinary matter, particularly one involving such serious and potentially reputation-damaging accusations. Laura also, with a touch of strategic genius, subtly yet unmistakably hinted at the potential for significant legal repercussions for the school district should they be perceived as obstructing justice, or as failing to adequately investigate, and potentially even enabling a false malicious accusation made by one parent against the child of another. The school district's response when it finally came after 2 agonizingly long, nail-biting days of bureaucratic deliberation was, to my immense, almost disbelieving relief, a grudging but nonetheless official acquiescence. They agreed to allow Laura Hayes, accompanied by a court-certified forensic video analyst of her choosing, and myself as an observer, to review the relevant footage in its entirety at the district's Central Security Office under the strict, unblinking supervision of their own legal and technical personnel. It was a monumental victory, a crucial breakthrough. The truth, I felt with a surge of renewed, almost giddy hope, was finally tantalizingly within our grasp. The viewing of that security camera footage a few days later in a small, sterile, windowless room at the school district headquarters was one of the most surreal, intense, and ultimately profoundly vindicating experiences of my entire life. Laura Hayes, our retained forensic video analyst, a meticulous, eagle-eyed man named Mr. Davies, ironically sharing a surname with the janitor from a previous entirely unrelated but equally stressful Sterling Solutions ordeal, a coincidence that brought a fleeting dark smile to my lips, and I sat huddled around a large high-definition monitor while two stern-faced silent district officials observed us with a wary, almost palpable suspicion. Mr. Davies, the analyst, began by methodically, almost painstakingly establishing the precise time frame of the lunch recess period, cross-referencing it with the official school bell schedule and the camera system's own internal tamper-proof time-stamping. Then he started to play the footage from the multiple cameras covering the expansive Northwood Elementary playground, his skilled fingers dancing across the control panel, zooming in, slowing down, replaying crucial segments, his voice a low, calm, analytical monotone, as he narrated his observations. The footage from the cameras covering the main athletic field where Noah had so steadfastly, so consistently insisted he had been playing soccer was, from my perspective, immediately, unequivocally, and gloriously exculpatory. There he was, my Noah, clearly identifiable. His bright red soccer jersey a vibrant splash of color against the green expanse of the field, engaged in a boisterous, energetic, and entirely age-appropriate game of soccer with Liam Jenkins, Michael Davis, Josh Kevin, and at least 3 other boys I recognized from his class. He was there undeniably visibly for the entire duration of the 45-minute recess period, from the first chaotic rush out of the cafeteria doors to the final shrill blast of the end of recess whistle. He never once left the athletic field. He never once went anywhere near the distant, segregated little kids' play structure on the opposite side of the school grounds. He was quite simply innocent. The relief that washed over me was so profound, so overwhelming, it was almost a physical sensation, a tangible lifting of an immense crushing weight from my shoulders. I felt tears-hot, grateful tears welling in my eyes, and I didn't even try to blink them back. But the truly damning, truly revelatory footage came from the cameras angled towards the second-grade wing in the adjacent primary playground. There, just as young Michael Davis had so accurately, so crucially described, was Sarah Jenkins. She appeared on screen approximately 10 minutes before the official end of recess. Her demeanor visibly agitated, her face flushed, her gestures sharp, almost angry. She was indeed engaged in a very heated, almost confrontational conversation with another woman, a younger woman with long, dark hair, whom I now, with a jolt, recognized from school pickup as Amanda Peterson, Billy Peterson's mother. And little Billy Peterson himself was there standing beside his mother. Not, I noted with a surge of indignant fury, displaying any visible signs of a traumatic head injury or a severely bruised elbow, as Sarah had so dramatically, so convincingly described to Principal Henderson, but actually giggling and playfully tugging at his mother's hand, seemingly entirely unfazed by the clearly very tense adult interaction occurring just a few feet away from him. Then, as Mr. Davies, our analyst, skillfully zoomed in on the interaction between Sarah Jenkins and Amanda Peterson, we saw it. The incident. It wasn't an assault by Noah. It wasn't even an accident involving Noah. It was quite simply a minor, almost trivial playground mishap. Little Billy Peterson, in his boisterous second-grade enthusiasm, had apparently tripped over his own untied shoelaces while chasing a stray ball near the edge of the play structure and had taken a rather unspectacular, if undeniably jarring, tumble onto the soft, wood-chipped surface beneath. He had, as young children often do, immediately burst into tears, more from surprise and momentary fright, it appeared, than from any actual significant injury. His mother, Amanda Peterson, who had been chatting with another parent nearby, had rushed to his side, comforted him, checked him for scrapes there were on the zoomed-in footage, none visible, and was, it seemed, about to dismiss the entire minor incident when Sarah Jenkins, who had apparently been observing from a distance, suddenly and with a strange, almost predatory intensity swooped in. The camera, unfortunately, did not capture the audio of their exchange, but the visual narrative was damningly eloquently clear. Sarah Jenkins was not offering comfort or assistance. She was interrogating. Her gestures were sharp, accusatory, directed not just at a bewildered-looking Amanda Peterson, but also with a sweeping, almost theatrical motion towards the distant, entirely unrelated main athletic field, where Noah and his friends were still at that very moment engrossed in their soccer game. Amanda Peterson, after a few moments of what appeared to be confused, then increasingly agitated discussion, seemed to be trying to placate Sarah to dismiss the incident to walk away with her now only mildly sniffling son. But Sarah Jenkins was relentless, persistent almost. Aggressive, her body language conveying an almost palpable sense of righteous and entirely manufactured indignation. And then, just as the end of recess bell finally mercifully rang, the footage showed Sarah Jenkins, her face a mask of what I now recognized as feigned performative outrage, grabbing a still reluctant Amanda Peterson by the arm and practically dragging her, and a now once again wailing Billy, who I suspected was crying more from the escalating adult tension than from any lingering physical discomfort, off towards the main school building in the unmistakable direction of Principal Henderson's office. The truth, in all its ugly, manipulative, and deeply profoundly unsettling detail, was now finally irrefutably clear. Sarah Jenkins had not witnessed Noah assault Billy Peterson. Sarah Jenkins had in fact witnessed a minor, entirely accidental playground tumble involving Billy Peterson and his own untied shoelaces. And then, for reasons still opaque but undoubtedly malicious and self-serving, she had deliberately, systematically twisted that trivial incident into a false, damaging accusation against my innocent son. Even it now appeared coercing or manipulating a clearly overwhelmed and likely confused Amanda Peterson into corroborating or at least not immediately refuting her fabricated poisonous narrative. The silence in that sterile, windowless viewing room at the school district headquarters after the final damning frames of the security footage had played out was absolute, broken only by my own ragged, disbelieving gasp, and then by Laura Hayes's quiet, steely, and deeply, profoundly satisfied exhalation. Even the two previously so stern-faced, so suspicious district officials looked visibly almost comically taken aback, their expressions a mixture of stunned disbelief and dawning horrified comprehension. "Well, gentlemen," Laura Hayes said finally, her voice a low, dangerous purr, her gaze fixed on the now frozen image of Sarah Jenkins's contorted, angry face on the monitor. "I believe this footage speaks rather eloquently for itself, wouldn't you agree? It seems abundantly clear that my client Rachel Miller and her son Noah Miller have been the unfortunate and entirely undeserving victims of a malicious, unfounded, and demonstrably false accusation. An accusation that has caused them both profound emotional distress, significant reputational damage, and has subjected an innocent 10-year-old child to an entirely unwarranted and deeply traumatizing school investigation. We will, of course, expect the school district to take immediate, decisive, and very public action to rectify this egregious injustice, to fully exonerate Noah Miller, and to hold Mrs. Sarah Jenkins fully and very seriously accountable for her despicable and, I would argue, potentially legally actionable actions." Her words, so calm, so measured, yet so undeniably potent, hung heavy-charged and entirely irrefutable in the suddenly very cold, very still air of that small, sterile room. The unmasking of Sarah Jenkins, my false friend, my treacherous neighbor, the architect of my son's undeserved torment, was complete. The fight for Noah's name, for his peace of mind, for his very childhood, was not yet over. But the tide, I knew, with a surge of fierce, triumphant maternal certainty, had finally, decisively, and irrevocably turned. The immediate aftermath of our revelatory viewing of the Northwood Elementary playground security footage was, as Laura Hayes had so confidently and so satisfyingly predicted, swift, decisive, and for Sarah Jenkins, utterly comprehensively devastating. The two school district officials who had witnessed the undeniable visual evidence of her elaborate malicious deception were, to their credit, visibly shaken, profoundly disturbed, and immediately, almost apologetically cooperative. Copies of the relevant footage along with Mr. Davies's our forensic video analyst, not the janitor from a previous tale, detailed impartial report authenticating its integrity and outlining its damning chronological narrative were immediately forwarded with an urgent internal memorandum to Principal Henderson and to the Northwood Unified School District's legal department. The subsequent official school investigation into Sarah Jenkins's false accusation against Noah, which had just days before, seemed like such an ominous, insurmountable threat to our family's peace and reputation, now transformed almost overnight into an investigation into Sarah Jenkins herself, into her motives, into her methods, into the disturbing, almost pathological extent of her willingness to deliberately, maliciously harm an innocent child and his mother. Principal Henderson, upon reviewing the irrefutable video evidence, I was later told by a deeply contrite Mrs. Davis, who had been privy to some of the internal school discussions, apoplectic with rage at having been so thoroughly, so convincingly duped by Sarah's performative maternal distress and her fabricated eyewitness account. She immediately summoned Sarah Jenkins and her husband Tom, who it turned out had been largely and perhaps conveniently unaware of the true malicious extent of his wife's actions, having been fed a similarly skewed self-serving version of events by Sarah herself for an emergency closed-door meeting. Also present at Laura Hayes's firm, but polite insistence, were myself and, crucially, Amanda Peterson, Billy Peterson's mother, the other woman from the playground who now finally, and with a courage born of her own dawning horrified realization of how she too had been manipulated and used by Sarah, was ready and indeed eager to tell her own unvarnished version of that fateful Tuesday recess. That meeting held in Principal Henderson's imposing book-lined office was not a confrontation, not in the traditional aggressive sense. It was rather a quiet, systematic, and utterly devastating dismantling of Sarah Jenkins's entire edifice of lies. Amanda Peterson, her voice trembling but clear, recounted how Sarah had, after Billy's minor accidental tumble, immediately, almost aggressively, seized upon the incident, insisting, despite Amanda's own initial far more benign assessment, that Billy had been viciously, deliberately attacked. Sarah had then, Amanda tearfully confessed, pressured, almost bullied her into accompanying her to the principal's office, coaching her on what to say, twisting the narrative, and then, to Amanda's utter horrified shock, had brazenly, and with a chilling, almost theatrical conviction, identified my innocent Noah, who had been nowhere near the incident as the perpetrator. Amanda, overwhelmed, confused, and intimidated by Sarah's forceful personality and her seemingly unshakable certainty, had, to her profound and now tearfully expressed shame and regret, initially remained silent, too cowed, too bewildered to immediately contradict Sarah's monstrous unfolding lie. Faced with Amanda Peterson's heartfelt, damning testimony with the irrefutable visual evidence of the security camera footage which Principal Henderson, with a certain grim satisfaction, played for her on a large monitor in her office, and with the cold, hard, unwavering presence of Laura Hayes, my legal counsel, who quietly but very effectively outlined the potential and very serious legal ramifications of filing a false police report, which Sarah had apparently threatened to do if the school didn't take immediate decisive action against Noah, and of malicious defamatory slander. Sarah Jenkins, my once so trusted, so respected, so friendly neighbor, finally, utterly, comprehensively crumbled. There were no more denials, no more excuses, no more attempts at manipulative, self-serving justification. Just a torrent of ragged, hysterical sobs, a litany of incoherent, self-pitying apologies, and a series of increasingly pathetic and entirely unconvincing attempts to rationalize her inexplicable malicious behavior. Vague, unsubstantiated allusions to personal stress, to feeling overwhelmed, to perhaps misinterpreting what she had seen, to even in a moment of truly breathtaking, almost sociopathic audacity, trying to subtly imply that perhaps I, Rachel Miller, had somehow, through some imagined, long-forgotten slight, provoked her into this Unfortunate, regrettable overreaction. Principal Henderson and Laura Hayes were having none of it. The consequences for Sarah Jenkins were as they should be, swift, severe, and very, very public, at least within the confines of our Northwood school and neighborhood community. She was required by the school district under threat of further more serious legal action to issue a formal, written, and unequivocal public apology, not just to Noah and myself, but to the entire Northwood Elementary School community for her deliberate, malicious, and entirely false accusation. This apology, drafted with considerable input from Laura Hayes to ensure its sincerity and comprehensiveness, was read aloud by a visibly shaken, deeply humiliated Sarah Jenkins at a specially convened and very well-attended emergency PTA meeting, and was subsequently published in the school's weekly newsletter and posted on the official school website for a period of no less than 30 days. Furthermore, Sarah Jenkins was by unanimous decision of the newly informed PTA Executive Board, a board now thankfully far less under the sway of any particular clique, formally and very publicly censured and permanently barred from holding any future PTA office or from participating in any official school volunteer capacity at Northwood Elementary, or indeed at any other school within the Northwood Unified School District for the remainder of her children's tenure within the district. Her social standing within our community, once so carefully cultivated, so assiduously maintained, was in an instant irrevocably and very justly shattered. She became almost overnight the very thing she had so cruelly, so falsely tried to make my son into: a pariah, an outcast, a whispered cautionary tale of envy, malice, and a spectacular self-inflicted fall from grace. The impact on her own son, Liam, Noah's once best friend, was, I confess, a source of genuine, if complex, maternal sadness for me. The sins of the mother, however unjustly, often cast a long, dark shadow upon the child. Liam, bewildered, ashamed, and undoubtedly deeply hurt by his own mother's inexplicable actions and by the subsequent unavoidable social fallout, became quiet, withdrawn, his previously so easy, so joyful friendship with Noah strained, almost broken by the weight of this adult-created ugliness. It would take time, I knew a great deal of time, and perhaps a level of forgiveness and understanding that was almost superhuman for two 10-year-old boys to muster for that precious, innocent childhood bond to ever truly fully heal. For Noah, the journey back to his former carefree self was also a gradual, often challenging one. The public exoneration, the heartfelt apologies he received not just from Sarah Jenkins, an apology he accepted with a quiet, dignified grace that made my heart swell with pride, but also from Principal Henderson, from Amanda Peterson, and from many of his own classmates who had in their childish ignorance initially believed the lies were all crucial healing steps. But the invisible scars of being so falsely, so publicly accused of being shunned by his peers, of having his fundamental sense of safety and trust in the adult world so profoundly violated, would, I knew, take far longer to fade. We continued with his therapy sessions. We talked openly, honestly about his feelings, and slowly, with the unwavering support of his true friends, his loving family, and a school community now far more aware and far more vigilant about the insidious dangers of false accusations and playground politics, my brave, resilient Noah began to rediscover his laughter, his confidence, his innate, joyful spark. And I, Rachel Miller, I learned through this agonizing yet ultimately empowering ordeal some invaluable, if deeply uncomfortable, lessons about the complexities of human nature, about the fragility of trust, about the often hidden corrosive power of envy and insecurity, and about the absolute non-negotiable and utterly sacred duty of a mother to protect her child at all costs against any threat, however unexpected, however insidious, however close to home it may originate. I learned that sometimes the friends we trusted the most can be the source of our deepest betrayals. But I also learned, and this was perhaps the most important lesson of all, that even in the face of such devastating deceit, even when the world seems determined to believe the worst truth, when pursued with courage, with tenacity, with unwavering integrity, and with the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's unconditional love, will always, always ultimately prevail. Our lives, Noah's and mine, were not just restored to their former peace. They were in many ways forged anew, stronger, wiser, more resilient, and more deeply authentically connected than ever before, a testament to the enduring, unbreakable, and ultimately triumphant spirit of a family that had faced down the darkness and had together chosen light.